Hi, good evening, everyone here in India, and good morning to everybody in the US or anywhere else you're joining from this evening, morning, afternoon. Um, my name is Mohit Thukral. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of Plaksha University for Tech Talk today. I am the managing partner and founder at Vivtera, and also a founder and trustee at Plaksha University. I'll give you a little bit of color, and I have a very, very special guest here tonight who I've known for years, and I'll introduce him in a bit. But before that, a little bit about Plaksha. Plaksha is a philanthropic effort of more than 80 people around the world. India, in the US, in London, in Singapore, and I would say in various parts of this country and world altogether. Our effort is to build a world-class technology university in India, which will be, if not better, than most of the universities in the US, as some of us are aware of. Plaksha is going to be starting its first undergrad program in the spring of 2021. And we are looking forward to getting the first batch of undergrad students that year. In our inaugural year of Plaksha, we are going to bring out some unique and differentiated programs as we go forward and building this great institution for the future of technology, for the future of solving some of the world's great grand challenges, and what we're going to bring for the young minds globally and in India is around various undergrad programs in technology education, whether it's computer science and artificial intelligence, whether it's robotics and cyber physical systems, or whether it's biological systems engineering and data science. These are the four undergrad majors that we are going to bring to the university as we go forward. But that's a lot about Plaksha, but I want to now come to my guest tonight. One of the things that we've been doing at Plaksha over the last 6 to 8 months is bringing global thought leaders to come and talk to you about what's happening in the world of technology and their journeys over the last so many years. Plaksha is all about innovation, entrepreneurship, and curiosity. That's how we want to build our university and the future of education. I have the privilege today of inviting and having with me and chatting with Dr. Inderpal Bhandari. I can tell you he's one of the best minds in data science and AI I have known over the last, I think, in the past 15 years. I've known you for 15 years, and it has been such a privilege to know of you and what you've done. Inderpal is the Global Chief Data Officer for IBM, and Inderpal has been kind enough to join us today from the US. He's today based at New Jersey. We are going to touch upon his favorite topic around data science and AI and how that really is the future of how the future is going to hold by using these technologies. Inderpal was the first CDO in healthcare. That's where I met him, in Medco. And he's actually transformed that role. And if you go back 15 years, there was nothing called a chief data officer in organizations. And he was one of the first, and healthcare, obviously, as we all know, is so much deep for data science and technology. He was named the US Chief Data Officer for the year by CDO Club in 2017 and has been, talking and an expert at talking to various groups, whether it's on YouTube, CNN, Fox, etc. Inderpal has led and developed IBM's data strategy, He brings in more than 20 years of experience working at Cambia Health Solutions, Medco, as I said. And he also founded Virtual Gold, the company, on data analytics in call center and international sports. Inderpal earned his master's degree from University of Massachusetts in computer engineering and electrical and computer engineering, and his Ph.D. from Carnegie Mellon University. I'm not going to spend more time in between myself and Inderpal, and I'm going to hand it over to him to share his thoughts. And Inderpal, like I said, we have a very diverse audience of young, bright minds on this call who are aspiring to be data scientists and artificial intelligence engineers of the future. We have academicians, we have folks from the corporate world. So over to you, Inderpal, and thank you very much for doing this and doing this for Plaksha today.
Thank you, Mohit. No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for the kind words. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. What I'm going to do is give you a sense of how we look at AI and IBM, and also give you a sense of what does AI really mean from the standpoint of a business. I mean, we have a sense of AI in a consumer sense, thanks to the likes of Google and Amazon, and they recommend things to you, they autocomplete your searches, etc. But what does it really mean from the standpoint of an organization? I'll try to give you some thoughts on that. I'll also touch on what it means to be a chief data officer, because people always ask me that question. And I'll run you through some forward-thinking trends and scenarios as that'll unfold as we head into the future. I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions because I understand that Mohit has some questions for me as well as the audience. So I will try to keep the presentation brief. And I think our slides are going to be available, so you can always look at them for background or reading or future reading. So I may not go through all the slides, but I want to at least cover the major concepts that we want to address today. So let me then go to the next slide, please. So with regard to the history, Mohit started off at Medco. So when I became the chief data officer at Medco, this was way back. We went back to 2006 to 2005, 2006. I think I was the only chief data officer in healthcare. That was the very first one. There were only 3 more chief data officers. What ended up happening after that was the profession took off. The companies began to realize that data was a strategic asset. And you started hearing things about data as the new oil, data as the new gold. And then they obviously needed somebody who could be a steward of the data. So prepare the data so that the companies can actually benefit from it. And the profession took off. Now there are literally thousands of us. You find them in, coming with the label chief data officer, chief analytics officer, chief digital officer, also significant overlaps with chief technology officer. So I've had the privilege, because of the original 4 that started out as chief data officers, I think I'm the only one who's left still doing the job, which I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm the one still doing it. The other 3 have gone on to either retirement or better things. But since I've been doing it, I've actually had the privilege of seeing the profession evolve and contributing to it. And I've been asked to create the chief data office. This is at IBM is my fourth company where I've actually done that. So within IBM, I'll just give you the quick timeline. 2016, I joined in December 2015, but so 2016, the first year was all about vision and data strategy. And I'll talk more about that. 2017, we built IBM into an AI enterprise. 2018, we created an accelerator to help our clients become AI enterprises, because, again, like I said earlier, most people don't really understand what an AI enterprise is. What does it mean for a business? And then from that point on, 2019 on, we're now essentially, we focused on making it much easier to replicate what we had done at IBM, so that a business would find it much easier to do what we did and to transform into an AI enterprise. In 2020, our focus has been to push the AI enterprise setting into a hybrid cloud setting. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, what a hybrid cloud is and why we went down that route, etc. Next slide, please. Let me start with the attributes of AI. That's one of the first things that I wanted to touch on. So the first thing, and this is not technology, I'm just going to talk about the attributes. If you have an AI system, what do you expect from it? The first thing is the system has to be an expert at something. It could be a field, like medical science. It could be a disease like diabetes, so it could be narrow like that. It could be a process, like your supply chain. It could be a whole domain like banking, but it has to be an expert at something. The second key aspect of an AI system is it has to be able to express itself. And when I say express itself, I mean to a person who is not a technologist, not a mathematician, not a statistician, should be able to work with the AI system, should be able to understand it, interact with it. So that's what I mean by expression. Why do I believe that? Why is that necessary? The reason it's necessary, I'm going to start with an example. This is my second go around at IBM. Mohit mentioned I finished my Ph.D. at Carnegie Mellon. I joined IBM as a research staff member at the Watson Research Lab. And when I did that, one of the projects I ended up doing, I backed into a field called data mining, which had to do with finding insights from data. In that sense, it was a very early forerunner of what we do today. I created this program. You can actually Google it with my name, Advanced Scout. It's called Advanced Scout. It was picked up by every team in the National Basketball Association, and the coaches started using it to plan game strategy in playoff games. So playoff games are the knockout games. So if you guys, are watching cricket and there are these knockout tournaments when the teams start getting eliminated, that's what the playoffs are in the US for the NBA. And what we ended up finding out was the computer program would find counterintuitive patterns. So the very first time it did something like this, there was a team, they were playing in the playoffs, the first round, they were down 2-0 at the point of elimination, and they ran the program, and the program came back and said, you've got to play your backup point guard and your backup forward in your starting lineup. That's like saying, you're going to play your number 8 batsman as the opener. And so something totally counterintuitive. And maybe somebody who doesn't even regularly be in the team is going to come in as the one down batsman. So very counterintuitive. I get a call back from the coach. Coach says, Inderpal, if I do this and we lose, not only will we lose the game, but I will also probably lose my job and destroy my career. This is the reason why these systems have to be able to express themselves, because the decision maker eventually is a person, and if it's an important decision, there's a lot riding on the line, right? So these systems have to be able to express themselves naturally. Now, there are situations where it's just you don't have enough time for that. So if you think of trading, algorithmic trading, for instance, that's an example where you really don't have to have time to get the human in the loop. But for most business decisions, the vast majority of business decisions, there's going to be a person in the loop. And if the system is unable to express itself, then it's just not going to work that well, because the human decision maker is not going to listen to it and will move on. So at IBM, we have this approach of total transparency around the AI system for that reason. A lot of people look at that and say, well, yeah, it also sounds good. There's marketing behind it. But the fundamental reason is to win the trust of your customers. If you're an AI, that AI system has to be transparent, has to make the customer very comfortable that they can, A, follow its decisions, B, that it's not going to eventually end up disintermediating you. So this is why expression is a key part of an AI system. The third difference, the third big E, I call it the 4 E's, the 4 attributes, is unlike previous technical systems based on software, which you had to program, right? Somebody actually had to write code. Then you evolved into systems where you did not really have to write all the code. Some you could do by way of business rules. In the case of AI systems, you actually educate them. You give them data, they learn from the examples. You tell them about edge cases, you tell them about exceptions. They kind of learn from us, we learn from them. It's that type of back and forth. And so that these systems are educated by us, and then they rapidly learn and move on to make good decisions. The final E is the most important one. These systems evolve as they see new data, as they see more and more data, as they see edge cases, they become more and more and more powerful. And so they're able to scale. Why is that important? Everybody's heard of the data explosion, right? You understand how data is growing on a daily basis. There is no way a person is going to be able to keep up with that. So we estimated at IBM, I think several years ago, that medical knowledge, it doubles in some phenomenally small amount of time. I forget, it's a matter of months, it'll actually double. So the other stat that's interesting in that is if a doctor wanted to keep up with what's being published in the journals, medical journals, they would have to pretty much spend 160 hours every week doing that, which would leave no time to see patients. So it's all about scale, right? So data is exploding. You need a system that's able to keep up. And that's why these systems are so powerful. That's why they are here to stay. And this is why when people say that these are really strategic systems, that's what they mean. This is the only way to address the data explosion problem. One other point I'll touch on here, if you extend my logic, you'll understand why this is important for business, right? I kind of said I would talk about why it's important for business. In a business, people make decisions every day at all levels, right? So there are senior people making decisions, there are also junior people making decisions. What you have to realize is that a business just doesn't exist for the sake of people doing activity. It's actually trying to make profit, it's trying to do, there's some major objective that's trying to be done. So no matter at what level somebody is, if they're making a decision and it's a poor decision, it's the weakest link in the chain, right? So the whole thing can unravel. You'll have to address that, you might have to replace, etc. But there are literally tens of thousands of such decisions being made across a large global enterprise like an IBM. And you might think, well, but do you really need AI in some of the lower level decisions? And what I'm trying to argue is that you absolutely need it. Or if you're not doing it today, you will soon. And I'll give you a simple example from my own area. In my area, there is a person who looks at the data of our clients, the different clients that we work with, and we work with clients globally, worldwide, and makes a determination whether the client is a government-owned entity. Now, why is that important? It's important because to deal with government-owned entities, there are more specific rules than for other businesses you might be doing business with. And as an ethical company, we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And those rules vary by geography, globally, etc. So this person is making this decision. The way this decision works is, person will do some research, internet research, etc. And then they will make a decision on this company. The salespeople will challenge it because they'll want it relaxed, right? Salespeople always want things relaxed. They want to sell to everybody. The legal folks will challenge it also. They want to constrict it. They want to narrow it down because they want to be very, very safe. And there'll be a back and forth. You can just see the inefficiency there, right, in the process. And eventually they'll arrive at something. Generally, it's right. We know we have the history. We can go back and look at it. But the way we've transformed that today is you have an AI system, Watson, that actually looks at everything that's available in real time about that client. So it will pick up things like a press release, like the government just acquired this company. You might think that's obvious. System will pick it up, but the person will get it in real time. Even more subtle things like The founder of this company just got appointed to a high-ranking government committee. These systems can infer that. And that's much more subtle. You might say, well, maybe that qualifies it as a GOE, maybe it doesn't, but it's still relevant in the discussion, and it helps you get to a better decision much more quickly. And so now you've got a person who's making this low-level decision really benefiting from AI. And so that's the reason I believe that this is going to be absolutely widespread. We'll all have to learn how to work with these systems because they'll be able to scale, keep abreast of the knowledge that's being generated, the data that's being generated, and then assimilate that and distill all that and present us with different options to make decisions. So that's the evolve piece. I want to make one other point, which is a subtle point about these systems. I'll go back to the basketball example. So the way we solve that problem, to convince the coach that it's actually a good idea to play those two players, those two backup players who weren't on their regular lineup, they wouldn't actually usually start, was we showed them the video clips when those players were on the floor in the two games that they lost. Now, once they saw that, they began to understand what was going on. They understood that, oh, this backup point guard is actually a very fast player, and the major player from the other team can't really keep up with this person and gets tired out, which affects him the whole game, even though he's one of the best players in the NBA. This is what happened. And the backup forward is somebody who has an outside shot, so he can take shots from a long distance. So he brings the dominant player from the other team, the big guy, out, and then they can pass it in. So they began to figure out the strategies. They began to understand. So what does that tell us? What that tells us is that to make a decision around some insight from data, you need context. That's what that video was providing us. It was providing us with the context. Now, at that time, we didn't have systems that were as sophisticated as we have today. So the way we solved it is we would find the pattern, and then because we had it time indexed to the video, we had the game play by play, and we would time index that to the video, we'd be able to go and serve up the clips for the coach, and they'll make the decision. Next slide, please. Today's systems actually are able to go after all that context. So they can go after video, they can go after audio, anything that you would kind of put as a record of the context around something, these systems can actually do that, harness that automatically. And that's why you see the applications across the board. So I mean, in the case of the Masters, the fantasy football insights, I'm drawing the examples from IBM, but really I think the best one is there was an AI program that Watson created, which produced a trailer for a horror movie all by itself. It's a movie called Morgan. That's a horror movie in the horror genre. And the team just gave this program a sample, like 100 horror movies, trailers, and it went through all that: scene composition, audio, volume, video, all that stuff, and then it created its own trailer for the movie. So that's the underpinning for why these systems are becoming more and more increasingly powerful. One is it has to do with keeping up with scale. The other, it has to do with keeping up with context. So all the different examples that we will cover, they eventually go back to those two fundamental things. That's why these systems are so exciting. Next slide, please. So within IBM, like I said, I mean, our goal was, once we realized that what we need to do is to enable the entire company to start using AI in their job. Then everything, from our supply chain to our different applications that are different industry segments we operate in, like mining, the COVID-19 response, everything used AI, right? So I'll just pick on a couple of quick examples. We had an AI program, which we kind of based it off this central enabling platform that we created, which I'll touch on in a couple of slides, that then allows anybody in the company to, let's say they're in supply chain, they can start making use of that platform to inject AI into the workflow that they go through, right, on a daily basis. So we have a program that actually looks at risks as they unfold globally. And these were weather risks, political risks, those type of risks. And then it maps to that the sites where we have to supply and the sites where our suppliers are globally. And it's then able to infer, this is what's going to likely happen. It's going to take an extra 2 days. We might need to find a backup. And so this was in place. When COVID-19 hit, we adapted that very quickly. We were able to by overlaying the COVID-19 data on top of that. So now we could essentially very quickly determine, where there were outbreaks, which suppliers were there, how it would impact the supply chain, which customers were there, how it would impact the financing, our finances as that unfolded. And every area in the company could make a determination as to how COVID-19 was going to impact what it was going to do. Next slide, please. More examples. I'll just let you guys eyeball that, but it's all around harvesting all this data, like making the world's most accurate forecast. Again, you make use of AI when you're gathering all this information. We do that with our weather company, earthquake detection, etc. Next slide. Let me now switch over to a few words on a chief data officer and what they do. I actually have this because I've done this job 4 times by now, I have it distilled into this 5-step program that I do as soon as I join a company. And there are 3 steps that actually happen in parallel and then 2 in sequence. But the most important step is the data strategy. And I'll just spend a few minutes talking about that. So you go into a large company and you are responsible for their data strategy. So what's the first thing you think of doing? The first thing you think of doing is you want to understand what the business strategy of the company is. So that raises the question, what is business strategy? Is it one of those books you pick up and read? And no, business strategy is how the company plans to make money. So again, the words are chosen carefully, not how it makes money today, but how it plans to make money. So in the case of IBM, when I joined IBM, we made money from a lot of different sources. We still sell mainframes. We're still the dominant, supplier of mainframes. We have middleware software, et cetera, et cetera. But if you talk to the senior executives, they would say it's going to be cloud and AI. Everything had to be around cloud and artificial intelligence. That's how they wanted to make money, and they were going to make money in the future. So our data strategy then had to support that. That's why you got to understand the business strategy, because then you plan the data strategy so it supports the business strategy. And so it became clear the company wants to essentially be a cloud and AI company. And then that raised the question, do our customers even understand what AI is, what it means to them? And the answer was no, that's not really true. So then we came up with the idea of, well, let's make IBM itself into a data-driven AI enterprise and use that as a showcase, as an example for our clients, because a lot of our clients look just like us. And that became our data strategy, right? So very sweeping, very broad, but that was the need that was needed. In other cases, you might have a much narrower data strategy. If the data strategy might be around, like, let's say if the strategy of the company is, we are going to go after this particular segment of the healthcare industry, and the data strategy might just come down to eventually, after you've done all the planning, we don't really have the data about the customers in that segment. Let's go out and acquire that data so we know who they are, and then we can target them. So that gives you a sense of how the data strategy unfolds. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this, but basic point here is that when you actually apply this stuff in an enterprise, it's not just about data. It's also about the processes, right? Like I mentioned, supply chain, they have their own business process. Any business process you have to get into, you have to integrate all this stuff. It has to work there. So it's not just about data. It's not just about technology. Those are the obvious ones, but it's also about the process, how you actually infuse it into the workflow so that, the example I gave you about tying the video to the data for the coach. The coaches are used to looking at video. That's their usual workflow. We brought in data, right? But we had to integrate that into their workflow. That's why that became so critical. So process is a big part of it. And then people, right? Again, going back to that same example, coaches were never used to dealing with data. You have to educate them. You have to make them comfortable about it. That whole culture around data is a key part of what you need to do from an enterprise standpoint. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this, but this goes into my organization. You guys can take a look at it if you see how you need to set up an organization to do the data office. That's what you do. A little bit about the platform and the hybrid cloud piece that I touched on. So we realized at IBM that the public cloud journey has been on for a while and it's been successful, but a lot of our customers, I mean, the vast majority, well over 80%, haven't really made big moves to the cloud. I mean, they've made moves, but 80% or more of their workloads are still working on data centers, private clouds, on-prem stuff. And when you look deeper into that, it becomes clear why they would do that. So that's one observation. The other observation is that the average company like ours uses like 9 clouds, so I mean, I think we use more, but the average company uses like 9 different public clouds in one way or another. So again, you extrapolate all that, you say, well, the companies have to be comfortable working across clouds. That's why we acquired Red Hat, and we entered into what we call the Cloud 2.0 era, which is going to be around hybrid cloud, where the data, the applications, etc., they could basically sit where they are. You meet them where they are. So the principles, for instance, for data that I have for my organization, ingest the data once, access it anywhere appropriately, write the code once, run it anywhere appropriately. So the appropriately piece comes from the layers that go above Red Hat. So you see Red Hat over there, right? OpenShift, that gives us the portability across all the clouds, as well as across on-prem installations. Because it allows you to work across all that without the complexity being handed back to the developer. And then what you do above that is that appropriately piece. How do you make sure that the right people can access it, that the right applications are running it? And so that's why the cloud packs that you see, there's the layer above, which kind of goes to the different things that you need to do so that, again, the complexity is not handed back to the individual developer who's trying to develop these things. And then you build the solutions on top of that. All right, next slide. So I gave you, we created that central platform for IBM, which takes in all our data, enables all our departments. So it's used enterprise-wide. I mean, active users were well over 100,000 users, at the end of 2019. We in fact stopped counting after that because now it's across the full enterprise. And there are all the major processes that we have essentially run AI because it's enabled by this central platform, data and AI platform. You have to, the data is critical because if the data is not prepared and if it is not up to function or capability, then you're not going to be able to do good AI. COVID-19 brought that home, right? Because data coming in was all new, was all garbled, it was inaccurate, etc. People didn't know what to do. So then it became, you couldn't apply AI to it. All the models that they did, all that stuff was all wrong. But what you could do was try to get the data in real time as clean as possible so people started making decisions. So the data and AI, they go hand in hand. I mean, you can't really separate them. And so that's why we've got the platform that we created, the central platform. One point I'll make on that is as these different major processes, like our client processes, supply chain, marketing, et cetera, as they converged on this and started using this, and we had all kinds of applications now running on it, the single most important metric that it actually impacts is cycle time, end-to-end cycle time. It just becomes much shorter, drastically, orders of magnitude so shorter. On average, 70% improvement in end-to-end cycle time. So that's the thing that you're looking for when you do these things. Next slide, please. Okay, I think these are now specific applications. I am going to skip them because I think we do need to leave time for questions.
Yeah.
And I will hand it back over to Mohit.
So Inderpal, thanks so much. This is really insightful. I'm really, I'm like itching to ask you this question, by the way, right? And I'll open up. This is my question. I find the story of NBA pretty interesting, and I know today whether it's cricket or any other game, it's so relevant. I just wonder, why did you write? A lot of us saw Moneyball, right? And Moneyball is a bit of what you just said, right? why didn't you really write a book to, apply the same logic and make a movie on NBA?
So, in hindsight, it was clearly a mistake because what I ended up doing was I did the program. It was Moneyball way before Moneyball was written. And I had access to the players, I had access to the coaches, I had access to the commissioner, and I could have written that book. Instead, I went off and started Virtual Gold, my own company. So that's kind of, but I mean, I could have absolutely done that. It was Moneyball before Moneyball.
Yeah, because it's fascinating when you see a movie like Moneyball and what data and AI and data science could do was fascinating. So, look, I've got a couple of questions from my end. I want to do this quick chat with you. I do want to keep, 15, 20 minutes later for the audience. You've been at the forefront of data science, right? And you have been the forefront of data. You've been one of the leaders in this space. And, 15 years ago, there was nothing called a CDO, and you became one of the 3 or 4 CDOs of those times. Tell us a little bit more about, the key turning points in your career, right? I mean, what really changed this whole trajectory over the last 15, 20 years? Because that's so relevant and important to some of the young and bright kids and folks on this call, as to learn from your experiences as they look at their journey over the next, and the world is now a little bit more agile and speed. How do you see that? How did that evolve in the as you looked at your career?
No, that's a really good question, and I'll tailor it to the audience because I understand your intent, Mohit, in asking that question. So I think I'll start actually back to my PhD days, and I'll draw out a couple of key turning points. They actually all converge around the same person. So I mean, I grew up in India, and I was BITS Pilani. Then I went to grad school, UMass Amherst, because that time to come over to the US, that's the way you had to do it. You had to get a scholarship, you had to come over. And then started the PhD program in Carnegie Mellon. I was doing that maybe 3 years, 2.5 years into the PhD program, which was on VLSI systems. Those times, very large scale integration systems, chip design, all that stuff. And I had written papers. I was well on my way to doing that. And then I ran into a professor. His name was Herbert Simon. He was a Nobel laureate in economics. He had won the Turing Award. He had 4 awards and from 4 major fields. He was just such an intellectual force. And it turned out that at that time, he was in some debate about, particular engineering problem. And even though he wasn't in the engineering department, he wanted to work with an engineering student. And so I dropped my thesis in VLSI, and I began a thesis in AI to do that, in the PhD program. I just felt, just gut sense that this is the right thing to do, even though it would add time. And part of that had to do with the challenge of working with this person was, I just immediately intuitively knew it would be far greater than anything I'd done so far. And that brought me there. And then what he ended up doing was he did a couple of things that eventually served me, I think, the best. One was the very first time I handed in a document to him, and he would set up these 1-hour meetings. You couldn't go in there and just shoot the breeze with him. You had to actually come prepared to have a robust discussion for 1 hour. But he had taken my document, and it was a sea of red on it. And he gave it to me. He said, now I've mocked it up. When you've written it back in English, come back and give it to me. And I read through that, and what he had really done after I assimilated what he had done was I realized that at least the time when I grew up in India, the whole idea of writing a paper the way we were trained was, the fewer people that understood it, the more smarter you were. But here it was the opposite. It was like the clarity had to be there. It had to be immediate. And so that's what he had done. And he had taken the trouble of writing all that down. So I took each example, I worked it and so forth. But the main lesson I learned there, and then obviously I realized that any kind of expression, as you go through your career to advance your career, the more clarity you can bring to communication, whether it's oral, whether it's written, whether you draw it on a piece of paper, that is the key thing. And that clarity of expression, it's not even, you don't have to be flowery, you don't have to have a massive vocabulary, etc. You just have to be clear. If you're able to do that, that's going to advance your career very, very rapidly. The other thing that he did for me was, when I was finishing my PhD, I was applying to universities, as most people would do. And I, in fact, was very close to getting a job at UCLA and almost accepting it and so forth. And I went to talk to him, and because he was writing the recommendations. And he said, I'll make one comment. I usually don't interfere with my students, but the one comment I'll make for you is I see two types of PhD students. PhD students who get their problems by reading journals, and PhD students who get their problems by actually working on a domain and then back into the journals, right? Because if you're a PhD student, you're reading journals, whether you like it or not. It's just, what's your bent? He says, you're in the second category. I don't see you going off and reading the journals, first. You get into something and then you back into all the stuff. I don't think that the academic setting is the best for you. I think it's the industry setting that's the best for you. And it just so turned out, I hadn't applied for any industry job, but it turned out my other advisor, who's an engineer, he said, IBM Research is interviewing. Why don't you go and talk to them tomorrow? And I went there. That was my only industry research interview. And I just went immediately for the job because, so that's the advantage of having mentors like that who can actually guide you in that direction. But I also just wanted to make that example because there are some important differences, and in terms of aligning the fit with your strengths to the environment you go to, that's very critical.
Look, I'm not good. I'm going to go one short question, and then I'm going to move back to the audience quickly. We have a lot of students, like I said, on this call from high school, universities, etc. today. What's your advice to them as they look at pursuing a career in the field of data science and AI? And then, we have like 20 questions on the Q&A. I'm going to get Sanat to really start asking you a few of them. But just this last one from my end.
So I think if you're interested in data and AI, you're in the right place. The timing here is that the industry is just taking off, right? But here's I'll give you another interesting thing about it though. When I went out and started my company, Virtual Gold, my startup, I felt the same way. I felt this whole industry is taking off. But it turned out that I was actually a little early in the game, right? I mean, even the books like Moneyball and all hadn't really come out. And the timing is now. I mean, this is really the time. If you're working with data science, AI, those are going to be just such central domains, disciplines to master that you cannot really go wrong by being in that field. I think in terms of charting your path forward, I mean, if I go back and if I think about, well, if I was starting out today and I was interested in data and AI, which I kind of discovered later that that's where I was, where I was interested. If I were to do that today, I think I would emphasize the hands-on piece of it. And it doesn't even have to be done by doing internships and all that. I mean, obviously, if you can, you should be doing that. But today, because there is so much available by way of tools, data that's just publicly available, and also just issues that people can start attacking and addressing and demonstrating what they know by doing that. And even just take the example of COVID-19. There's all kinds of data that's actually available about that. vaccines, they just published some stuff. I spent, I think the night before last, I just looked for myself. I went through all the data that Pfizer had presented to the FDA, for the approval of their vaccine. It's a fascinating read. I would encourage all of you to do that, rather than just wait for the sound bites and all that. But so there's all this stuff that's basically available publicly. And if you're able to demonstrate your knowledge, your application, how you go off and apply this, how you learn from it, I just think it'll prepare you much better. You'll learn just by doing stuff. It'll also give you showcases to put forward, when you talk to employers, or it'll also give you ideas to do startups. But that's the one piece I think that's very different from when I was growing up. That piece was very, very difficult to do then. But today, I would emphasize that as probably on par with anything you do at school or formal learning. Just picking up using the resources that are available publicly, including all the free courses and all that stuff, right? I mean, I think it's just a very exciting time to do that. And from a future standpoint, you can't go wrong with that choice.
Okay, Inderpal, thank you so much. I'm going to hand this over to Sanat to ask them. There are tons of questions out there. I know Carol is trying to respond to some of them, which helping us there. But Sanat, over to you for some of the questions for Inderpal.
Thank you, Mohit, and thank you so much, Dr. Bhandari, for that fascinating talk. I'm Sanat from Plaksha's undergrad outreach team. Some of your comments have been very useful to me personally, especially the bit about clarity. So the first question that I have is, for subjective materials such as movie trailers or art, how would one validate predictions made by the build system? How do you define something as the perfect movie trailer?
I think for something like that, that's subjective. It's, the analogy I would use is like the Turing test, right? How do you know if a computer is smart or not? Well, you put it up against a person and have another person judge whether they can tell the difference. So you need tests like that, right? So that, like, for instance, that trailer, a lot of people saw that movie. I don't think anybody, thought that trailer was done by a computer. So for the subjective stuff, just by, the way that question is posed, if it's subjective, it depends on the person. So which means then you've got to use people to decide whether it actually is up to speed or not. And I think telling the difference is a major way to do it. That's the way, people have traditionally addressed that.
Great. So the next question is, with increase in computation power and just so much data coming through, how do you see AI evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think you'll see, the evolution will be along the lines of obviously harnessing the explosion better. So that goes to the question about the increasing power, all that. So, being able to do all that stuff much, much more effectively. I think the other trend is on the context piece, where you're able to look at data that's captured in different media, but pertains to the same event. And you're able to bring all that together and relate that automatically. So there'll be, and then with the Internet of Things and all that, that's going to become more and more relevant. I think also, we are always fascinated by big data, but I'll also make a nod to small data, where, if you don't have a lot of data, if you have a rapidly emerging event, like we did with COVID-19. I mean, initially, all the history stuff was out of the window because, all the models were wrong, everything, if you go back and look at what happened, you'll get a sense that anything that relied on lots of big data didn't really work. But there was stuff that worked, getting people accurate information in real time, making sure that it's trusted information, it's not fake, it came from a real doctor, real patient. All that stuff was extremely valuable. So there's also a whole angle around small data and AI, which people traditionally don't associate with AI, but it's still very much there, and I think that'll be another aspect. So there are just lots and lots of such trends, but I just focused on a few.
Thanks for that. I think that's quite a counterintuitive answer. So we have a lot of teachers and educators on this call as well, and probably addressed part of this already, but if someone is interested in, let's say, introducing data science to their students, what do you think is the best way to do it? And perhaps what is the right age of for doing that?
I think the last part of your question, uh, I think the earlier you can do it as early as you can. It goes back to my comment about clarity. Can
Right.
you get it to a level that you can actually explain it to a young one, right? I mean, like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. Can you actually get it to that level? And I think that's the like I've been, my youngest is actually 5 years old, and I've been trying to teach her the concept of probability by using coins. It's more a question of can you actually get it down to a level that they can understand. But they intuitively she knows there's something there. So I think you can actually start pretty early. So my suggestion would be as early as possible. The examples are really what's key. I think as the kids get a little older, using sports, I think, is a great metaphor. A lot of kids are interested in sports, and using that. I mean, when I was doing the NBA stuff with IBM Research, we had a whole program where we were bringing in kids from elementary school and middle school, and just showing them what we were doing. And it was just tremendously successful program, and to get kids interested in concepts of math and programming and all that stuff. So I think sports is a tremendous metaphor. I think also my other comments about just what's publicly available today. I think there's lots of really interesting data that's available today. And, if you curated some as an educator and then present it, I think it could be just very useful to interest the students.
Okay, that's quite helpful. Also, Dr. Inderpal, I mean, especially to a non-technical audience like myself, we, I'm sure, have a lot of misconceptions about AI and about data science. Are there some common myths that you want to talk about and maybe bust them for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think my talk had quite a few of them. Maybe I didn't make them explicit, right? But one myth is that AI is going to completely replace the worker.
Right.
We'll all have nothing to do. And if you think through all the examples that I went through, it all eventually has to do with AI working with a decision maker, a human decision maker. I don't see that changing fundamentally, because there's an element of trust there, right? I mean, if you're running a business, or even if it's your profession, if there's something coming in that's going to just completely replace you, you won't trust them, you won't work with them. But we teach them, they learn through our examples and all that stuff. So I just see there's a contradiction there that, there'll be some balance that will be struck, which is kind of true of almost any progress, right? There's always, but the myth is, is too extreme. That's the way I tend to see that. I see this more as a collaboration between the AI system and the human decision maker to make better decisions. So I think that's one. I think that big data, small data one was another. We actually see that everywhere, even within enterprise. Yeah, you would think it's enterprise is all big data. There's a lot of small data stuff. All the stuff that has to do with, for instance, explaining data, right? If you set up like a data lake in a company, you can bring all the data there, but if people go in there and they don't know what's there, if they don't understand what you've put in there, and I don't mean the techies, right? I don't mean the people who are looking at the database fields and looking at all the technical descriptions. I mean the business guys who want to come in. I'm looking for revenue data. Is this revenue data? Looks like it, but look, this doesn't make sense. And if they don't immediately understand all that, that data lake becomes a data swamp. And that's, those are examples where I would say there's a small data problems, but you have to solve them and solve them well and effectively.
Okay, just a follow-up question on that. So when you're saying small data, are you also talking about, let's say, the quantum of data, where, for example, there's an organization which has started recently, it doesn't have many data points to go by, and are you saying that even that might be relevant in a special sense?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of the question. If there is an organization,
so which is new
yes,
and doesn't have a lot of data points to go by, and in that sense has a very small data set. Are you saying even that might be quite relevant in a special sense?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I'll give you a perfect example of that, right? You take a little kid,
Right.
you know, the very first time they touch something hot, that's a sample of one. They're never going to go back and touch that thing. So it just depends on the impact eventually, right?
Right.
It's not, you know, yeah, if you look at it from a statistical standpoint, yes, but you talk to that kid, I mean, the kid is not going back to touch that hot cup. It's just not going to happen, right? So it's just they understand there's the impact piece of the equation as well that comes into that.
Okay. So here's another interesting question. So the question is, for critical areas like medical, how much of the liability do you think the developer should be taking if the AI makes a mistake?
So this is, you know, it goes to that whole larger question around transparency and trust, right? I mean, this is, and we've come to that recognition within IBM that this technology has to be all about trust. And I include data in that. Data, AI, you know, they just go there hand in glove. So it's all about trust. And I think because we live in a capitalist society, it's all about business in many ways. I think what will happen there is it's going to evolve to that level of liability has to be adopted by the developer that fosters trust. I think eventually it's going to come down to an equation like that that gets solved. You know, it's and there are various models for that. You kind of see that even today, right? I mean, in the vaccine space, for instance, there's very little liability because it's, you know, novel stuff that's being done. Somebody gets injured from a vaccine, there's very little thing that you could do by recourse. There's just a court. You go to a court, you can't go through the usual processes. There are many countries that have that set up to enable the pharmaceutical companies to actually produce vaccines, right, or to be stopped. So I think there are factors like that that play in, but eventually it'll be about trust. Is there enough liability assumed by the developer that whoever is using it is going to trust that?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bhandari. We are very close to ending, so I'll pass it back on to Mohit to make the final remarks.
Like Inderpal, there are like tons of questions on the Q&A chat, and I think we can keep on going for another half an hour on this. But in paucity of time, I think, you know, some of these questions we'll keep handy. We'll send them across.
Yeah, send them across, Mo. Send them across.
Carol
and I will take a look at it. Yeah.
Some of these ones we'll send across to you and Carol. But look, thank you so much. I can't appreciate you taking out this hour to talk to us at Plaksha. You know, giving your views. I know we are very passionate about building a school, maybe better than your alma mater in the US. But I think our view is that, you know, this is such a relevant topic for today, and AI and data science is such a core part of us as Plaksha. And like I said, we run a 1-year, you know, fellowship program with UC Berkeley, and it is all around data science and AI. So it's so relevant to us as Plaksha. It's very relevant to today's world. You know, the future is going to be about AI and data. And, you know, it was incredible. And thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today, this morning and this evening here in India. Really appreciate it, Inderpal, and my sincere thanks to you. And Carol, thanks a lot for helping us set this up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.